Welcome to our live webcast for the betterment of the structural engineering profession, a joint CASE, NCSEA, and SEI Town Hall event. Thank you for joining us. You may adjust your audio using any computer volume settings you may have. On the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A pod. To send a question, click in the text box and type your text. When finished, click the send button or push enter. All questions that you submit will be seen by today's speakers and will be addressed at the end of the presentation. At the conclusion of today's program, you'll be redirected to a post-event survey. At this time, I will turn the floor over to our moderator, Glenn Bell, to begin the town hall.
Welcome, everyone, to what I know will be a very engaging and informative discussion on the joint vision for the future of structural engineering. The vision was adopted in April and May of 2019 by the three organizations represented here today. Those are the Coalition of American Structural Engineers of ACEC, or CASE, the National Council of Structural Engineers Organizations, NCSEA, and the Structural Engineering Institute of ASCE, or SEI. I'm Glenn Bell, the immediate past president of SEI, and I'm very pleased to be the moderator of this distinguished panel comprised of the current leaders of the three organizations representing structural engineering in the United States. With me here today are Stacy Bartoletti, who's the chairman and CEO of Degenkolb Engineers. Stacy is the chair of the CASE Executive Committee. Emily Guglielmo, who is a principal with Martin & Martin Consulting Engineers. Emily is the president of NCSEA. And Joe DiPompeo, the founder and president of Structural Workshop, is also the president of SEI. So today our panelists are going to offer us a brief history of their respective organizations. They're going to talk about the rationale for forming this joint vision. They will review 10 initiatives that the three organizations are working on to pursue that vision and discuss how the three organizations are working together to advance the practice of structural engineering. We're going to have plenty of time for your questions and inputs, so please enter your questions on the Q&A pod as we go. NCSEA, SEI, and CASE were formed in the late 1980s and 1990s. And I'm old enough to recall the early days of these organizations. And while each had and continues to have their own raison d'etre, our three organizations were, well, frankly, not always well coordinated. We sometimes duplicated efforts and even competed in some respects. But over time, NCSEA, CASE, and SEI have been increasingly working together to advance the profession of structural engineering. In 1998, we developed a cooperative agreement to publish Structure magazine jointly. Around 2017, the leaders of the three organizations started meeting at least annually. And later in 2017, we developed a joint memorandum of understanding amongst the three organizations with more formal commitments to work together. And then in 2019, a big step, we developed and adopted the very inspiring and ambitious joint vision that is a subject of our town hall discussion today. We're really pleased about the close cooperative relationship our three organizations have developed, and we're anxious to share our story with you and hear your questions and feedback. So I want to start by asking our three panelists to give us some brief background on their organizations. Emily, would you kick it off, please, with NCSEA?
Sure, thanks, Glenn. As you said, the National Council of Structural Engineers Associations, or as we call ourselves, NCSEA, was formed nearly 30 years ago. But as Glenn previously mentioned, some of our structural engineers associations, or SEAs, actually predate NCSEA, examples being Illinois from the 60s and California from the early 1930s. So keep in mind that prior to NCSEA's formation, there were a few regional SEAs. But in the early 1990s, there really was no national organization focused solely on structural engineering. So with that in mind, NCSEA was formed with a couple of specific goals in mind. The first one was to continuously improve the level of practice of structural engineering. And the second one was to be a resource for our state SEAs so that they could communicate and collaborate. Today, our mission in partnership with our SEAs is to support practicing structural engineers to be highly qualified professionals and also successful leaders. Today, we have 44 state SEAs. I would argue the strength of NCSEA really lies in our bottoms-up structure. And that begins with our SEAs, which are comprised of local practicing structural engineers. NCSEA aims to provide that overarching umbrella of support and interconnectivity to advocate and strengthen our state organizations. Unlike CASE and SEI, we don't actually have a parent organization. NCSEA is governed by a 9-person board, but it's really our committees that advance our organization. Many of our committees have existed since NCSEA's inception, but we have others that have been formed in the last decade or so, including some notable ones, the Young Member Group Support Committee, our Structural Engineering Engagement and Equity, or SE3 Committee, our Resilience Committee, and more recently, our Sustainable Design Committee. But each and every one of our committees exists to provide that advocacy, resources, and support for our state SEAs, and specifically for the practicing engineer.
Thanks, Emily. That's certainly a lot of MOs to coordinate and support and unify. Good for you. But I can see how this bottom-up approach would be very empowering to the local members particularly. So thank you. Stacy, could you tell us about CASE?
Sure, happy to, Glenn. Let me start off by saying I'm happy to be here. It's great to participate in this discussion, and not everybody can see it, but I think we had a wonderful turnout of registration for today. So I'm glad there's interest in this topic. So first of all, to understand CASE, I think you really need to understand ACEC. So American Council of Engineering Companies is the parent organization of CASE. It has its roots going back over 100 years. There are thousands of member firms in ACEC representing 600,000 engineering professionals. All 52 states and regional councils are represented within ACEC. The mission of ACEC is to strengthen the business environment for member firms. Within ACEC, there are 6 coalitions that represent various disciplines and firm sizes. Obviously, CASE is one of those. The Coalition of American Structural Engineers is one of the 6. CASE has about 200 structural engineering member firms. Again, it's important to recognize that CASE membership is firm membership. It's not individual membership. CASE itself originated in the late 80s. At a time when obtaining a professional liability insurance for structural engineering firms was difficult and very cost prohibitive. Unlike you, Glenn, I can't say I was practicing in the late 80s, but certainly I've heard stories about those times, and that was the impetus to found CASE. It was started originally actually as an acronym SHRMAC, which was the Structural Engineers Risk Management Council, in collaboration with one of the large insurers in the profession, with DPIC. Again, the idea was for structural engineering firms to get their house in order and be able to manage their risk, so insurance companies would be willing to provide professional liability insurance for them. Mm-hmm. The mission of CASE is to improve the practice of structural engineering by providing business practice resources, improving quality, and enhancing management practices to reduce the frequency and severity of claims. CASE itself has 4 standing committees. It has a guidelines committee that writes national guidelines on various topics. There are a dozen or so of them in publication. A toolkit committee, which are smaller snippets that they're really intended to address a specific need regarding risk management and claims management. Contracts, so CASE has a series of contracts that we maintain and develop over the years, and programs, which is really our educational piece.
Great, thanks for that, Stacy. So you reinforced that ACEC's members are firms, which is very interesting, and I think I could see how it would tie into the particular mission of CASE and ACEC. And I'm sure you're able to leverage the perspective of and resources of ACEC as well. So that's great. Thank you. Joe, please tell us about SEI.
Sure. Thank you, Glenn. SEI is the Structural Engineering Institute of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And SEI was founded in October of 1996. It grew out of the structural division of ASCE, which is much older. So this year is going to be 25 years since SEI was founded. We were the first ASCE institute, and now ASCE has 9 institutes. We have approximately 30,000 members and 60 chapters worldwide. One difference from CASE and NCSEA is our membership is just for individual engineers, not through a local organization and not through their company. So that's one of the the main differences between the three organizations. We have student grade, member, and fellow grade, separate from ASCE membership, although most of our members are also ASCE members. We have 9 board level committees. We have a futures fund, across US committee, 5 divisions. That's codes and standards, global activities, local activities, technical activities, and business and professional activities. And we also have representation on ATC, SECB, SELC, and SSCC. We also have a memorandum of understanding with iStructD, which is our counterpart organization in Great Britain.
Great, thanks, Joe. 30,000 members in 60 chapters is pretty impressive. I think we'll all see increasingly as we go through the next hour or so that these 3 organizations are somewhat different in their mission and their organization and how they go about their work. And that's a strength. That diversity is a strength for us. But we're all working together to advance the practice of structural engineering. So let's get familiar next with the joint vision, guys. Stacy, would you give us some background on the purpose of the vision document and maybe how it came about?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd start off by saying I get the honor of being able to introduce to everybody this joint vision, and I drew the long straw, which gives me the pleasure of being able to do that. By no means was this my work or even primarily Case's. In fact, really the history of the joint vision goes back to SEI. And SEI published in 2013 a document, a vision for the future of structural engineering and structural engineers, a case for change. The document was being updated in the 2017, 18, 19 timeframe, but it originally was published in 2013. As the 3 organizations in the last few years started to decide that it was appropriate to be collaborating more, we also felt like there was a need to start to hold joint leadership meetings. That was really one of the first areas of collaboration that we had. So going back to 2017, I think Glenn mentioned that earlier, the leadership of the 3 organizations started getting together. In 2018 timeframe, SEI asked the other 2 organizations, NCSEA and CASE, for input on their update to the vision paper. And quite honestly, the leadership got together and we all looked at it and said, this is a great document. It's great that it's being updated. And we should really use this as our guiding light for how the 3 organizations should work together and what is our vision. But we also agreed that the document, while it was a wonderful document and had a lot of detail in it, it was too long to be a guiding light. So we really took the 3 organizations work together and we took that document and we condensed it down to a single page and said, this is really what we think needs to be the future of the structural engineering profession. So the 3 organizations agreed on that common vision. We developed that 1-page summary, and the 3 organizations all voted on it and signed on to it in the April-May timeframe of 2019. It was signed by the then chair of CASE, Corey Matsuoka, the then president of NCSEA, John Schmidt, and the then president of SEI, David Koch.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. Emily and Joe, I mentioned at the outset that we have 10 initiatives in the joint vision. And I wonder if I could ask each of you to speak to 5 of them in whatever order you like. Tell us why they're important to structural engineering. Why did these particular 10 initiatives make it to the top 10 list? So Emily, would you like to take the first 5?
Sure, I'll take the first 5, but I'll really emphasize the first one. The first initiative is to develop and position structural engineers as leaders and innovators on project teams and in society. And realistically, this first goal could serve as the header or as the overall vision, with potentially the other 9 initiatives falling underneath this one. For this specific initiative, I'd like to highlight a couple of things. The first one, obviously, is the word leadership. Structural engineers historically have excellent training and education on our technical skills, but I would argue that maybe leadership has been less traditionally well developed in engineers. The second really important point about this particular vision is that it's not enough to just be a professional leader, an innovator. This leadership must also clearly demonstrate its value to society. So to summarize, this goal envisions a future in which structural engineers elevate our status by improving society through our leadership. I'll admit, candidly, I believe this goal is our most difficult to address, but also our most critical goal. Today, we are very excited to share some new programs in development that directly work towards this vision. The second goal is to reform structural engineering education. Over the last few decades, countless studies have been undertaken, reports written, recommendations made on education in engineering. These many reports hint at a multifaceted challenge with often competing interests. Frankly, the structural engineering education is often a bit disconnected from everyday engineering practice. University education requirements have exponentially increased in the recent past, and it's extremely difficult to balance academic ABET accreditation requirements, the known pressures on academics, and the desire to complete a degree in 4 years. Nonetheless, we acknowledge that our profession requires both that broad-based skill set, but also a technical depth. And in addition to our technical topics, graduates need to have these critically important soft skills. We mentioned leadership already, but business acumen, concise written communication, strong public speaking. And all of these challenges have led our joint leadership group to focus upon engineering education reform as a worthy aspiration. To that end, SEI has a focused committee for the reform of structural engineering education, or CROSSE, and NCSEA has a basic education committee which aims to supplement the current university educational curriculum. The third goal is to improve the mentoring of young structural engineers. And to highlight the importance of mentoring, I'd like to share with you a few key findings from some of our recent SE3 surveys. These surveys find that mentorship bolsters confidence, self-esteem, and really expands networking opportunities, in addition to providing increased organizational engagement and retention. Specifically, respondents without members are nearly 25% more likely to consider leaving structural engineering. We know mentorship fosters effective communication and actually bridges the knowledge gap between our younger and our more seasoned professionals. Our fourth goal is to enhance the professional development of practicing structural engineers. As you are all aware, our profession is constantly evolving. We know that structural engineers must stay on top of current and changing technical and code provisions. We must do this to safeguard the life, health, property, and welfare of the public. All three of our organizations have historically provided very strong professional development programs, but more recently, this joint leadership group has prioritized collaborating and sharing each of our three organizational strengths. For example, we've focused on leveraging CASE's business expertise, SEI's code development leadership, and NCSEA's focus on practicing engineering topics. And we're very excited to share some of these specific successes on this initiative later. Our fifth and my last initiative to share with you is to advocate for structural engineering licensure. Similar to the need for professional development, which I just spoke to, we recognize the vital role that licensure plays in protecting the public. In fact, licensure was one of the topics that first brought our three organizations together. The Structural Engineering Licensure Coalition, or SELC, is a joint effort between these three organizations and also one more, SECB, which is the Structural Engineering Certification Board. SELC focuses on position statements, articles, case studies, presentations, all related to the importance of structural engineering licensure. And again, I'm excited to share that some collaboration has been underway on these initiatives, and we have some actionable successes to share with you later on in our program.
Wow, Emily, that's great. Very ambitious initiatives, and that's only half the list. Joe, could you take us through the second five?
Sure. So number 6 we'll start with performance-based codes and standards, and the profession. And when I say the profession, I mean the three organizations that are here today. We believe the leadership of these three organizations and these organizations is representative of the profession as a whole. Obviously, there's differing opinions here and there, but the profession believes that performance-based design is the future of our profession. So we're working hard to advance that, and we've made some progress. We do have a performance-based structural fire design document that's currently available, and a pre-standard for performance-based wind design that's available. And the hope is that these documents will become more than just pre-standards or afterthoughts, and will be what we use going forward. And I'm going to tie this into the next topic, which is resilience, because we also believe that performance-based design can be used to enhance resilience of our designs and our work. And resilience is a timely topic right now. I think I had originally had some notes here about my experiences going through Superstorm Sandy and the recovery and what was built back and how it's been performing. But I also think we have this in-your-face example of what's gone on in Texas recently, and how so many systems have failed. And obviously that entire system needs to be more resilient. So you can see right there the importance of building resilience into everything we do. Earthquakes, floods, fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, these are just some of the natural disasters that we have to deal with and typically have designed against. Making sure that a building doesn't fall down is one thing, but building infrastructure and systems to be resilient against these types of things, in one sense, is the very core of what we do, is protecting the public from these things. So personally, I lived through Superstorm Sandy in many ways, both the damage and the recovery. And the effort that was put in after that to build back a much more resilient infrastructure and dune system, and basically everything had to be started from scratch, and it was done completely different than what was there before. And we have had some brutal nor'easters since then, and one about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, that under prior circumstances in prior years would have caused some damage to property and flooding, and it caused a significant amount of damage to the beaches and the dunes, like 20-foot cliffs in some areas on the dunes, but the dunes did what they were supposed to do. There was not 1 ounce of property damage. So there's an example of how a resilient system can work. Resilient systems need to be applied to critical infrastructure systems such as police, fire, and hospitals, but also to communities in general. So we're working to help authorities in making decisions to improve the community's response to natural disasters. And we think that's very important, obviously, because that's what we do. We protect people from these things. Next is diversity. Our profession has historically been primarily male, and a lot of the underrepresented groups in society have been even more so underrepresented in our profession. That has been changing lately, slowly. We have a wonderful profession that gives people opportunities to have good careers and advance themselves and their families. And more people of all types should have those opportunities. Diversity is also good. Diversity in many ways is also good to have a variety of opinions and voices in any discussion, debate, company, or organization. And that's something that we are working towards. While we have been working towards this, the events of last year accelerated the need to address diversity. And we've had many people that have stepped up and shared stories of events and issues that we as a profession must address so they don't happen again. And many people have also stepped up to volunteer to work on diversity efforts in all of our organizations. And later on, Emily has some more information on some of the specifics on this. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of it. Emily will give you some of the specifics a little later. Next item is to collaborate on common causes. Our 3 organizations have several common initiatives that have committees and subcommittees that regularly collaborate on. It's not just the leadership that is collaborating. This group that you're looking at here has regular meetings, and that's a big improvement over how some things have been done in the past. We are all working together and working together better than we ever have. And I think we are continually improving that. And I think part of that is a testament to the leadership's ability to set aside any sense of their organization being, more important than something else, and just, realize that we're all here to work for the profession, cooperate. This town hall is a big step in that direction also to, this is something new we're doing, and we're trying to show the profession how we're collaborating. And we want to engage the membership of the organizations in that collaboration. So collaboration going forward is important to all of us, and we want to work together to move our profession forward. Next item is to advance the profession nationally and globally. So much of what we've already highlighted serves the purpose of advancing the profession. Collaboration is obviously critical to these efforts, but we need to have a united front and keep moving forward, even if there are some internal differences of opinion. We are trained problem solvers, and we have a lot we can offer the world. The world has a lot of problems right now. It always does, but seems to have a lot more now. Advancing our profession will show people what we can do and that we can solve these problems.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Joe. Again, a very impressive and ambitious list there. There's clearly a lot of work going on. For those joining in, we want to hear what you think about these issues. We have a poll coming up here that asks you to tell us which of the 10 initiatives you think are most important. You can pick multiple choices here, and this will help shape some of our discussion further on in this session. So please submit your answers. And while everyone is putting their answers in, please remember to put your questions in the chat pod. We already have some great questions coming in, but it's a rare that you'll have the opportunity to talk to the 3 leaders of the top structural engineering organizations in the United States. So bring your questions on and don't hold back. This is a talented group, and let's see what they can do for us here. We've already got some great questions in chat for them. So please. Very good. Very ambitious list of 10 that you've given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure a lot to work on. I think one of the things we want to stress here as we're working together on this is the need that this is an all hands on deck issue, not just for the leadership of the 3 national organizations here today. So here we are. We have the results of the poll. The top, actually, there's quite a bit of interest in all of these, but developing leaders and innovators came out at the top. 60% of you said that's critically important. 42% diversity, and 42% advancing the SE profession nationally and globally. So, and there's strong opinions about all of these going forward. So terrific. Thank you all very much for that. We'd like to get in a little bit more specifics on what more specifically the 3 organizations are doing on several of these initiatives. So I'm going to ask each of you to address particular topics here, if you would. I mentioned in my introductory remarks that Structure Magazine was one of our early collaborative successes. Emily, can you tell us how the 3 organizations collaborate to bring this great publication to the profession?
Sure. And hopefully all of our attendees here today are familiar with Structure Magazine, as it is a benefit of your membership, whether you're part of CASE, NCSEA, or SEI. But Structure Magazine is a monthly magazine, and it is, as Glenn said, a joint publication of the 3 organizations. The magazine is run by, it has an editorial board that has representation from all 3 of the organizations. As was mentioned in the opening, the magazine did start in 1998. And we like to think of it as the structural engineer's source of information on materials and methods, design and analysis, covering all major construction materials and all types of buildings, bridges, and special and unique structures. The editorial content is authored on a rotating schedule by these 3 organizations, and often includes thoughts about vision or challenges, successes, or organizational highlights within the structural engineering profession.
Great, thank you, Emily. Stacy, I know that business and risk management and contracts are a subject that's near and dear to your heart. Could you tell us a bit about what the groups are doing together in that arena?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, CASE is taking a lead role, at least some of the time here, in promoting the strong business practices and risk management practices but doing so strongly in collaboration with the other organizations. A couple of examples of the collaboration that has been happening late last year, I believe it was in October and November timeframe. CASE and NCSEA collaborated on the Business of Structural Engineering Conference, which I understand was a great success, and looking forward to doing more of those types of sessions in the future. For a long time, CASE has been partnering with SEI and producing business and risk management sessions at the SEI Structures Congress. CASE also itself holds winter and summer meetings and sessions at the ACEC conferences that are open for anybody who's participating to participate and learn more about business and risk management and contracts issues. On the topic of contracts itself, CASE maintains, I mentioned this earlier, but maintains a suite of model contracts as well as a commentary on the AIA contract documents. If you're not familiar with these and you're not utilizing these when you have the opportunity to bring a contract forward yourself, I would highly encourage you to do so. These CASE contracts are written by structural engineers. They have legal input into them, and they're really a great set of contracts. There's a dozen of them representing different cases, different situations, and applicability. So I'd highly recommend you take a look at those if you're not in your business right now. More recently, the three organizations have been talking about how do we provide more influence into the other contracts that we all see as structural engineers in the future. So many of us are working under AIA contracts, DBIA contracts, or EJ-CDC contracts. And what we've all agreed is that CASE is going to take the lead on that, but going to be certainly seeking input from NCSEA and SEI in how we can get involved and influence the other contracts. What we're doing right now is as we're preparing a white paper on the topic to number one, understand, what contracts are out there in these other formats and what is the process that they use to develop and update these. And as we develop that, we'll certainly be sharing it across the entire industry and looking where there is participation already and how we can bring that together and speak with one voice on how we want to see these contracts modified in the future and come to be developed in the future.
Stacy, that's great. Particularly the outreach, beyond the engineering organizations, really important work. So there's a level of sort of coordination and collaboration going on there, isn't there? Yeah, great. So I want to pose a question to Joe. And this is on the topic of leadership. It comes up frequently in discussions about the future of structural engineering. We hear that young engineers are eager to learn more about it. What's happening in this arena in our organizations?
Sure. Well, development of engineers as leaders is a priority for this group. It's also an important component of many of our other initiatives. It's kind of one of those things that is a blanket over a lot of other things, or has a component of it in a lot of the other things we're doing. And it was interesting and exciting to see that the poll results show that this is also something that the membership and the attendees see as very important. So in that sense, our goals and the membership's goals are aligned, which is a very good sign. Engineers are trained and experienced problem solvers. And as I said before, and you'll hear me say this again, the world has a lot of problems to solve right now. We've already done some of that. The Johns Hopkins COVID map, which you keep hearing about, that tracks all this, that is partly out of the medical school, but that's partly out of the civil engineering department that tracks all that stuff. So we are using our skills to solve problems, but it's not publicized. Nobody knows that. Nobody talks about it. Nobody thinks about it. I just saw one of the Q&As or chats said there was zero media coverage of Leslie Robertson's death, which, that's correct. I mean, that he was a giant and it barely got a mention. So we definitely need to do a better job of letting the world know what we're capable of. We have to get active in our communities, active in our jobs, and active in the world. Help and show people and show the world what we can do, and show the media what we can do. Our organizations have several initiatives in the early stages that we hope to dramatically increase our focus on leadership. So everyone that voted for that as the most important item, you'll be happy to know we're on it. We are exploring how we might work together to create programs and initiatives for leadership development. Some of this stuff is a little reliant on getting a little more back to normal. Can't really be done remotely, so it's in the works, and stay tuned. And the March Structure Magazine editorial I wrote it, and talks a lot about this. So if you want to hear some of these talking points again, take a look at the editorial.
Thank you, Joe. And yes, back to Les Robertson. We do need to celebrate our heroes, don't we? Within our organization and outside as well. Point well taken. Emily, addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a challenge in our profession and for our professionals for some time. But the tragic events of last year has really brought this issue front and center in our public dialogue. We saw this come up very high in the recent poll that we did here in the interest of people out there. What are our organizations doing together now?
Yeah, Glenn, as you and also Joe mentioned earlier, the last year has really challenged us as leaders to reevaluate how our profession responds to racial injustice. It's also caused us to honestly reflect on our progress thus far towards a profession that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. This past June, CASE, NCSEA, and SEI listened to numerous stories from our members who have suffered discrimination or injustice. Together, on behalf of the structural engineering profession, we issued a call to action to identify and eradicate behaviors that perpetuate racism and inequality within our profession. While these shared words represented a very critical step to establishing a vision and frankly, a commitment to accountability, it's actions that lead to meaningful progress. In the last few months, we have formed a joint diversity, equity, and inclusion committee with leaders from all three of these organizations. Our goal is to strengthen our existing programs and create new initiatives while we accelerate progress to a just and safe environment for all of our members. And while our collaborative efforts are critical, we also recognize that these efforts must exist at all levels, including at each of our three organizations. To that end, CASE has prioritized content focusing on the business case for diversity and how implicit bias affects our daily practice. SEI is committed to the formation of a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee with a focus on the ethical case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also a connection to the ASCE Mosaic DEI efforts. NCSEA has reaffirmed our commitment to DEI that started with the formation of our SE3 committee in 2017. And in the last 6 months, NCSEA has generated written and webinar resources focused on visioning and planning to improve diversity within our leadership, partnered with the National Society of Black Engineers and the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, issued our first ever diversity scholarship, and prioritized dissemination across our profession of the 2020 SE3 survey data specific to racial equity. We completely accept that real change takes significant commitment, persistence, and intention. And we're here to call for you today. We were looking for your voice and your active participation to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and fight racial injustice. Our leadership firmly believes that CASE, NCSEA, and SEI, and the structural engineering profession are well positioned to improve our communities and to contribute to a better future for all.
Great. Very nice, Emily. Thank you. A real tough problem. Work needed at all levels, a huge challenge for us that's going to take continuous long-term commitment. Well said. Stacy, we've been working to advance SE licensure for some time. What's happening and are we making progress?
Yeah, it's good question. And there is a lot happening and there is progress that's being made. So I guess the first thing that I would comment on and say is that SE licensure is supported by all three organizations. So all three organizations have come out substantially in favor of SE licensure. In addition, the three organizations, along with SECB, the Structural Engineering Certification Board, formed a number of years ago the Structural Engineers Licensure Coalition. So Another organization that is supported by all four, so the three structural engineering organizations, as well as SECB, it was formed, and its mission is to serve as a united voice for the structural engineering profession for the promotion of structural engineering licensure, working toward implementation in all jurisdictions. So again, the vision is to have SE licensure in all jurisdictions. A number of things that have been done through SELC, most recently, and I don't even think it's been completely published yet, but it will be very soon, is a document called A Vision for the Future of Structural Engineering Licensure. The document is actually, it's a good read, and it's a nice document, a lot of information. It has really a history on licensure and examination and how all that has developed to the point we're at today. It describes how licensure happens in other professions, and it's not all the same as it is in structural engineering. It talks about the process that's used for other countries and how they deal with licensure. It talks about threats and trends influencing structural engineering licensure, and also identifies and discusses certification and charter as interim steps to licensure, which could be interim steps in certain states to get there. And then obviously concludes with a vision and some implementation plan on how we could see getting to SE licensure. Mm-hmm. Another document that has been produced is a significant structure model recommendations. So if there's going to be a SE licensure practice act in any state, well, then you also have to define, well, what structures need to be designed by structural engineers. And the SELC has come forward with recommendations that are based on some of the current code definitions without tying it specifically to codes, because the codes are changing, obviously, or do change. Also have developed a position statement on continued professional development. SELC, as well as the three organizations, I'll take a strong stance that professional development, continuing professional development, is a very important piece of maintaining a license and SE licensure, as well as a desire to see some uniformity across the jurisdictions and how that continuing education is required. We want to remind everybody that structural engineering licensure is a state issue, right? And we can develop tools and we provide information, but the effort really needs to be a grassroots effort at a state level. We don't have national licensing in the country; it's state licensing. And I don't know that that's going to change anytime in our near future. A little update of where we are right now as a country. There are 2 states that have full practice restrictions. So all structures have to be designed by structural engineers. That's Hawaii and Illinois. We have a number of states that have partial practice restrictions. Those are Alaska, California, Georgia, Nevada, Oklahoma, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. And then there are many other states that have title restrictions or registration designations of structural engineer, but don't have any, I'll say, teeth that go along with it. A couple of the most current states to really make progress in this, one is Oklahoma. So Oklahoma passed a professional structural engineer requirement for significant structures, how they define significant structures. That took effect on November 1st, 2020. Georgia also passed structural engineering requirement for designated structures, and that took effect on January 1st of this year. There are active processes going on right now in both Florida and Texas that I'm aware of to be looking at structural engineering licensure.
Excellent. Wow, a lot going on there. Thank you very much, Stacy. Joe, I want to turn with you to climate change and the growing awareness of the contribution that the built environment has on CO2 emissions. What's the structural engineering profession doing about the embodied carbon problem?
Sure. I'm going to talk about the SE 2050 commitment. My first statement here is basically the mission statement of the SE 2050. So the mission of the SE 2050 commitment is to support the SE 2050 challenge and transform the practice of structural engineering in a way that is holistic, firm-wide, project-based, and data-driven by prioritizing reduction of embodied carbon through the use of less impactful structural materials, Participating firms can more easily work toward net zero embodied carbon structural systems by 2050. And I apologize for reading that a little stiff and verbatim, but I felt that said it better than I could possibly talk about it. So SEI has a co-branded website with SE 2050, and the SEI board has endorsed the vision and ambition of the SE 2050 challenge and recognizes the need for coordinated action across our profession to achieve the globally stated goal of net zero carbon by 2050. We have some partners in this. One is iStructE, one is NCSEA, and one is the Carbon Leadership Forum. The other organizations also are working on similar efforts. NCSEA has a newly formed Sustainable Design Committee specifically structured to support this initiative. The chair of that committee is actively involved with SE 2050, so there's another collaboration at the committee level that's happening, as I spoke about earlier. The plan is to use that committee to disseminate and support the network of state structural engineering associations, the SE 2050 initiative, and encourage practicing engineers at their firms to engage with the SE 2050 initiative. And CASE and ACEC see sustainability as a significant issue that needs to be supported and addressed by the engineering profession. CASE supports the SE 2050 initiative and encourages its member firms to sign on to the SE 2050 commitment. And anybody that wants to get involved with this or learn more about it, the website is fantastic, and it's the SE 2050 website.
Thanks a lot for that, Joe. There's a lot there. Getting to net zero embodied carbon by 2050, pretty ambitious, but I think most people would agree pretty important right now. So thank you for that, Joe. There's a final topic I'd like to discuss before we get into Q&A. In fact, we have several questions coming up about professional education. This is post-graduate education. So I wonder if each of you might just touch briefly on some of the things that the organizations are doing together in that arena. Who'd like to go first?
I can go first, and I think we have many successes to share. I'll just pick on one of them. This year, NCSEA engaged CASE to deliver what was originally envisioned to be an in-person pre-conference to the summit, but like all things ended up being a webinar series called The Business of Structural Engineering. Stacy mentioned it earlier, it was very well received, and the seminar covered topics like marketing, leadership development, contracts, financial metrics, and project management.
Great, thank you. Stacy, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mentioned before, just another example is CASE's participation with SEI at Structures Congress in developing sessions and bringing sessions to the Structures Congress around business and risk management. I would also just add for myself that this type of professional education collaboration is really important, particularly for CASE. CASE being a member firm organization, as I mentioned before, actually has a harder time reaching into individuals. And by collaborating with NCSEA and SEI, it gives us the ability to reach more individuals and provide that educational component that is a part of our mission.
Great, thank you. And Joe, do you have any examples?
Sure. SEI has a collaboration with NCSEA in their conference to do a codes track, and we've been invited to speak at that track at the NCSEA Summit. We have an insider perspective of the future of performance-based design and forthcoming changes anticipated in ASC 722.
Great, fantastic. Thank you. A lot of collaboration going on in that arena. So we have another poll we'd like your opinion on. Your view of the relative importance of those things that we just talked about, those 7 initiatives that we just talked about. So please put your comments and opinions in the chat, and we'll see what you all think about this. Meanwhile, while you're doing that, we have some fantastic questions coming in here, a lot of questions. So panelists, I think I'm going to jump pretty quickly to those questions so that we can be sure that we're able to address as many of them as possible when we finish this poll. And I think you're seeing some of them coming in, so I think you'll agree with me. We've got a lot of great stuff to talk about here. So let's just get these poll answers up, and then we'll get on to the questions. Fantastic. There we are. Again, a pretty good cross-section. DEI getting the most votes at 23%. SE licensure, 21%. Leadership development, not surprisingly, that came up high on an earlier poll as well. So great stuff. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So guys, I'm going to jump right into the questions because we have so many of them. Stacy, the first one is a tough one, and this is I'm gonna direct this one to you. This is from Julian, who says, with respect to the history of the three organizations, has there been any discussion of unifying the three organizations into one structural engineering organization? AIA has it for architects. iStructE has it for structural engineers in the UK. Is there a better way to unify the profession for it to come all together? I guess you could add to that. Why do we have three organizations?
Not an easy question, right? So, I mean, I guess I'd come out and address the first piece of the question, first of all, directly and say, I mean, no, to date, we haven't had any discussion that says, you know, what would it look like or what would we need to do to create one organization out of the three? There's a lot of politics, right? And I didn't say politics, there's a lot of history in all three organizations. And I kind of liken it a little bit to, you know, saying, well, why do we need three states on the West Coast that touch the Pacific Ocean, right? And it's not that easy to bring them together. I think what we're doing right now with the three organizations of collaborating is extremely important and extremely valuable. And I think you're going to continue to see that going in the future with what's been established in the last number of years. I can't foresee myself in the near term, at least, that we're gonna converge this into one organization. There's too much history, I think, there right now to do that. So I think we got to be looking at the next best thing, which is making sure that we're working together and that we are not stepping on each other's toes, and that where there is initiative happening in one organization, we're not duplicating it, but we're supporting it in the other two organizations.
Yeah, well put. Thank you. I might also add there, Stacy, to remind everybody that SEI is part of a larger organization, ASCE, and CASE is part of a very large organization, ACEC. And I think all of us who've been involved in those organizations would agree that we have great benefit in the structural engineering community of being part of a larger community that speaks with a large voice and has resources there. So, like you said, Stacy, it's a complex issue, and the point that we keep collaborating and working together, I think, is the most important one. So thank you for that. Joe, I have one for you from an anonymous attendee who mentioned that several years ago they heard that ASCE had a desire to add a master's degree as a requirement for a PE. Is that still an objective of ASCE? Where does that stand?
Oh, well, I'm speaking from memory here without having all the details in front of me, but there was the Raise the Bar initiative, I believe, which that was a component of it. You know, right now that initiative is not active, and I don't think there is an active push for that at the moment. Correct me if I'm wrong. But, you know, I think there's many people in the profession that want to raise the level of minimum credentialing, and that goes hand in hand with the licensing. But the initiative that I believe he's speaking of is Raise the Bar, which is not active at this time.
Yeah, and I might add to that if I could, because I was involved in the Raise the Bar initiative. A primary focus there was to make a master's degree a baseline requirement for professional engineering. And that, of course, as Stacy mentioned earlier, this is licensure is up to every individual state. That proved to be a difficult practically impossible thing to do. And so I think a lot of the efforts right now in ASCE are focused around how we can improve the credentialing of, we're talking about structural engineers here, but other engineers as well, short of trying to take the route of making it a requirement for PE. And there's a lot of work going on in ASCE as well. Let's see. I have another question here. I had one for Emily. 1 second, please. Emily, this one is for you. For the betterment of structural engineering, the profession hinges to a great degree on attracting the top high school graduates who are STEM oriented. And doing so necessitates offering them employment packages, including extensive training and mentoring that are commensurate with what tech companies are offering, which in turn requires commensurately increased fees so such competitive packages can be offered. Would you like to comment on that? That's a tough one.
Yeah, sure.
I told our participants not to hold back and give us the tough ones, so they're doing it. You want to take that one, Emily?
Yeah, sure. This is really kind of that chicken and the egg question. You know, if we could all look at each other and raise our fees, we'd probably get sued for this. But in the meantime, what we should be doing is showing value. And so this joint vision is really working towards that. It's the idea of showing value to our society, not just living in our structural engineering world, but rather serving as leaders and innovators within our communities. And as we start to accomplish some of these initiatives within our joint vision, the hope is that we are naturally raising the bar on our profession, that we are educating our entirety of our profession, and that there is that slow progress towards whether it's more prestigious, higher pay, in the end, trying to attract those new students, new grads into our profession. But it's not simple. It's multifaceted. It is definitely on the radar of all three organizations and our joint leadership. And we are trying very hard to attack it at multiple fronts. And I frankly see a lot of the questions coming in here asking about accountability. And so while this isn't something that, you know, in 6 months we can join ourselves in a meeting and pat ourselves on the back that it's done, we do hold ourselves pretty accountable with this group. We've got a tracking matrix. We are meeting frequently. We are putting little check marks next to initiatives in hopes that when we look backwards 5 and 10 years down the road, that we can say we have measurably moved the needle, whether it's pay, whether it's attracting new grads to our profession, whether it's diversity. So I realize that that's not a simple answer, but not a simple question, and something that we are very committed to, which is really what the joint vision is speaking to.
Glenn, can I comment on that too?
Please do, Stacey. Absolutely.
I absolutely agree with what Emily had to say. I think there's no doubt that we need to be competing for top talent, right, coming out. And and right now, I mean, the structural engineering profession doesn't have the same cachet as technology has. But I think one thing that we do have going for us is we have purpose in what we do, right? I mean, in serving the public and providing safe places for people to congregate. I think that's extremely valuable, but it can't be the only thing. You know, you wouldn't be surprised hearing this from the chair of CASE, but we also have to be business people, and we need to get better at running our businesses. We should have a poll question here that how many of you in your business even can know whether you have an individual project that is profitable or not, or how well you've done on an individual project. So I think it has to be through education. I think it has to be improving business practices. We have to look at the bottom line, and we have to be profitable as businesses that we can pay people, and not just rely on the higher ground of being a structural engineer to support the public.
Well put, Stacey. Thanks for taking that, and you too, Emily. Thank you. And isn't the point of this question a lot about what the joint vision is about, working together towards a better future? Stacey, while I have you, we have another question that relates to licensure, so I'm going to pass this one on to you. And this is from Pavel, who would like to ask what industry is doing to prevent the hurdles and obstacles related to structural engineers obtaining registrations in various states. The level of bureaucracy across states varies, but in general, it only erects invisible walls on obstacles for businesses. And he goes on, but I think you get the point, and you can, I hope you can address that question.
Boy, I can try. I mean, that's a tough one, and that's not just a structural engineering issue, right? I mean, that's an issue for all engineering licensure. I would say that the thing that we're probably not doing as well as we could be, but we should be doing better, is also coordinating with NCEES, right? NCEES already has systems in place to try and make the licensure and the comity process easier across state lines. And we should be engaging with them also to try and support their activities. I'm not aware that we as a structural engineering profession have any specific initiatives out there to do that. Certainly, if we could get structural engineering licensure in all states, that would be a good step to to getting us along that route also.
Yeah,
I just want to chime in for 1 second on that.
Please do. Yeah.
I mean, I see this as a big problem because we've done projects in 20, 30 states through the years, and it's very difficult for a smaller firm to get what they need in a timely manner and get all the licenses they need and COAs and foreign registrations of corporations. It's tough enough to navigate what you have to do and figure it out, but a smart person can do that. But to take the time to do that takes you away from stuff, and then to take the time to put all that together and wait for it to all go through. I think it's something that's not talked about enough is the burden that puts on businesses and hampers the ability of smaller businesses to compete. So.
Yeah, and unfortunately, doesn't it all go back to our Constitution, because professional licensure is a states' rights issue. So
yeah, well, that's correct, but there should be a way to.
If we can wave a magic wand and change the Constitution, maybe we could solve it. But yeah, go ahead, Jai. I'll cut you off there.
The answer is to have a national credentialing body that all the states agree to adopt that credential as their licensing. So.
Yep,
that's a bigger conversation, but that's how you get around that.
That could do it.
Hey, Glenn, I'd like to make one comment on a tangent here also, and this doesn't just this kind of topic doesn't just go to licensure, right? I think all of us, and again, I'll speak on behalf of businesses here, but all of us in our businesses have some challenges coming out of the pandemic, and I'm not sure all of us are even thinking about what those implications are, but right now, many of our employees are working remotely. And as they come out of this, are they going to continue to want to work remotely? And are you going to allow them to move wherever they would like to move and work remotely? And that brings up some very significant business issues around compliance and taxation. Employees in different states have different tax requirements. And it's as Joe mentioned on SE licensure, it is a big implication on businesses to be able to support that. So that's one of the things that CASE tries to tackle. We have a session coming up tomorrow and the day after in our winter meeting talking about tax and compliance issues of having employees in different states.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Emily, I'm going to address this one to you. Someone noted that sustainability is not in our joint vision. We mentioned resilience. Given the close connection, Joe talked a bit about sustainability, but why is it not one of the top 10 in our statements there?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start by admitting resilience isn't sustainability and vice versa.
Yeah.
And when we wrote our joint vision, we took our best pass at this, and we could certainly have an 11th and a 12th and a 13th, and sustainability has become something that we are as a profession more and more focused on in the recent past. And so rather than reauthoring a joint vision annually, we still find these common causes like sustainability still fits very nicely in our joint vision in terms of advancing the profession, collaborating on common causes. So sure, if we were writing it again, it might show up in there explicitly, but our joint vision is really trying to be a very high level overarching vision for a 20, 30-year timeframe. And so there will always be specific initiatives and words that aren't explicitly said, but that doesn't mean that sustainability isn't critically important. And that's why we've committed to quite a bit of time here today to speak on that.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Emily. We have a related question on performance-based design. So I'm going to direct that one to Joe because he addressed that earlier. This is from Ken, who said that he's interested to see when will performance-based design be used to increase performance rather than just reduce the costs of a life-safe building. Resilience is great, but when we use PBD to eke out every pound of performance just to arrive at a life-safe building, we actually wind up with less resilience. Any thoughts?
Okay, thank you, Glenn, for throwing that one at me. Well, I think the answer is performance-based design is a concept and a way of arriving at a design, but the performance standard that you need to meet, we can set to be whatever we want. If we want to set that standard to include certain things, we can. I think performance-based design certainly can be used exactly as he described to make leaner, more efficient designs, but it also could be used to require, performance metrics and other things such as, resiliency, sustainability, carbon, other things. So depends on what standard you're trying to perform to.
Thank you. Emily, I saw you nodding your head when I asked Joe about that. Do you have some thoughts you want to share too?
No, the question resonated with me. I think it was Ken. I think it's a fine point, and it is a little bit more about, as a profession, what are we trying to achieve and who are we speaking to? And we can take any tool like PBD and we can use it for multiple benefits, whether it's cost savings or increased performance. And I am hopeful that our profession will take heart in the discussion of resilience and functional recovery and use these tools in that way. But at the end of the day, performance-based design is no more or less powerful of a tool as the user and as the person who's buying the building puts pressure on you. So it's just a fabulous question, and I would encourage our audience to think hard on that answer as well.
Yeah. And might there also be a component of education and advocacy and leadership and communication and persuasion on our part? Maybe we're not presenting the value proposition to owners in the right way, which ties into a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. Emily, I have a different question for you. This is from an anonymous attendee. Renewing codes every 3 years places a time and cost burden on small businesses. I applaud the 5 and 6 year cycle on some of the material reference documents. Do the 3 organizations support, or are you working to encourage ICC to extend the IBC code cycle from the current 3 years to 5 or 6?
Thanks, Glenn. I'll start by going back in time. I'll make up 10 years ago. There was a very real push both within ASC, SEI, and NCSEA to advocate for our practicing engineers who use the codes with ICC to go to a longer code cycle. But if you consider the structural portions that live within IBC, it's not a majority. There are many, many other players with competing interests and competing abilities to influence. And so there has been a very intentional removal of many of the structural provisions from IBC. And this is by design and by advocacy of the structural engineering organizations. And it's being put in other places like an ASCE 7. And as the commenter noted, the ASCE 7s and our material design standards have intentionally moved to the 6 year code cycle to remove that burden from practicing engineers, whether it's the financial purchase or the learning new codes. We can talk about advocacy and encouraging our local jurisdictions to not adopt every cycle of IBC. However, the core tools that we use that are embedded within IBC already do skip a cycle. So I would argue we've put in some real work there about a decade ago. There is a very intentional movement towards using standards that allow us to control the amount of time and use a much longer code cycle. But I would encourage practicing engineers to make their voices heard, to go to code hearings, practicing engineers are not terribly well represented in that venue. And I think it's important that we make our voices heard.
Great, thank you, Emily. Thank you very much. Joe, I'm going to direct this one to you, shifting gears. Andre writes, and it's a very nice note, it's extraordinary what we're seeing here. He's talking about what we're doing right now. To believe is to see there is a form of union between all those organizations in the US to get to a common goal, to take structural engineering ahead. Andre would like to know, might we have similar examples in the world for countries to engage engineers in a significant future vision that will improve our way of life and for next generation? So there's a component of globalization there, and I'm directing the question to you because we know that SEI has a global activities division and is engaging with other structural engineering organizations. You mentioned iStructE in the UK. What do you think about Andre's point and comment?
Right. Well, we are doing some of that. You know, we do have a global activities division. We do have international chapters, and we are partnered in a sense with iStructE. And iStructE is not just an organization for Great Britain. They also have other countries that they are the organization for. Correct, Glenn?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So you know, in that sense, we are representing globally, but I certainly think, you know, the Global Activities Division is relatively new. So this is something that we've really made a push for the past few years and made a lot of progress on. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know what other organizations are out there that wouldn't, you know, that we're not collaborating with. If there are, then, you know, maybe we should, you know, have the Global Activities Division try to engage them more and get more partnerships. I think it's a good idea in theory, and I think we've made tremendous progress and we're doing a lot. If there's something we're missing, though, I think we should explore it.
Yeah, we'd love to do more of that, and I know, like you said, GAD is a relatively new division. We've talked a fair bit here about credentialing, licensure, master's degrees, things like that. And I do know that the GAD has a subcommittee thinking and working with others in its very initial stage on global credentialing. So a big vision there to think about a structure of global credentials. That's going to take some time to make progress on, clearly. But Andre, there are people here thinking in the same direction you are. Thanks.
We just had the discussion about how difficult it is just to get the states to coordinate. So doing that worldwide would obviously be a monumental task. So.
Yeah, yeah. Emily, I'm going to direct this one to you again from Anonymous. Generational differences and values can make the topic of diversity and inclusion particularly difficult to discuss. How can firms become more comfortable discussing the challenges of diversity? And how can younger engineers articulate diversity issues to senior leaders in a tangible way and justify spending time to address this issue?
I think there's a lot of different ways this answer can be made. And I'll just briefly look at each of the three organizations I mentioned before, but CASE has put a little bit of a business spin on this discussion. So maybe that's the angle you want to take with your business leader, is explaining why diversity is actually a strength for your business. I mentioned before that SEI's committee, DEI committee, has done a really deep dive into the ethics. As an engineer, what are we ethically responsible for? And so there is an ethical case for the discussion of DEI. I'll put on my NCSEA hat. I'm hopeful that you can find the SE3 committee. There are many, many resources that have been created and are available to engineers who would like to make a change within their workplace. There are tools that are very actionable, things you can suggest to your firm, whether it's regarding policy, whether it's regarding outreach, ways that you can craft what can be a relatively simple recommendation or suggestion for your firm to consider. I think the comment at the beginning about this being a hard conversation is important, recognizing that everyone comes from different experiences and backgrounds, but it's very healthy that we're having these discussions. I really do believe that progress and the best things in life are on the other side of a difficult discussion. So I would encourage you to have those discussions, make sure that you're armed with the proper information and resources, but then be empowered to have those conversations with your employer, because it really is important for you, it's important for your firm, and it's important for our profession.
Thank you, Emily. That was a great answer.
Can I add one? Can I just add one comment on behalf of a business perspective again?
Yeah.
I think it's important that we all remember that structural engineers, we don't produce a product. We don't develop widgets, right? And the real value in our organizations is the people, right? If we don't have the people, we don't have anything left in our companies. So as we're thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, remember that there's also power in numbers, right? And engage the younger staff to engage in a conversation with leadership, right? Leadership, if you're in the leadership role, I'd recognize, or I'd say that you need to listen to the younger staff, because that's the future of your company, right? Remembering that our people are our value. So there are a lot of differences of opinions on this, but if it is younger staff that is very passionate about this topic, well, them coming together and in a proper way, bringing it up to leadership should certainly engage a conversation, in my opinion.
Yeah, very good. Spoken from the CEO of Degenkolb. I'm sure you're listening. Stacey,
Trying.
Thank you. It's not easy. I've been in that seat too, but it's really important. Joe, I'm going to direct a question from Nicole to you. As an entry-level engineer, I have issues with taking what I learned in college and applying it to real-life applications. She's asking, is there a social platform where entry-level engineers can receive guidance? But in your answer, please expand on other opportunities beyond social platforms too.
Sure. This is a good question for me. So thank you for real this time, Glenn.
I knew it was, Joe. I know you well.
I started, I was 29 when I started my company. And, you know, I had a master's degree in structural engineering and thought I got the best education I could possibly get in college. And, you know, I went out to work and I realized I didn't know half the things I needed to know. I was very lucky because I had a really, really, really good mentor who was in his 70s at the time. And it was a very small office. And I worked 4 or 5 years day in and day out with him. And being in that small environment where you have to take on everything from, you know, drafting your own projects to coming up with details to designing stuff, every aspect of working, I had to learn, and I had a really good mentor. And in a couple of years, I felt I was able to go out on my own and start a company. But I think that's the exception. I think it's a very hard transition to make. I think finding mentors is tremendously important. There's a tremendous amount, not just soft skills that you have to learn, but there's a tremendous amount of real world stuff. I mean, you can't just do what you're doing in college and go out in the real world and do it. It's going to take 3 times longer than the next guy. And as Stacey's saying, it's going to become a non-profitable project, and you're not going to go very far in your company if you're, you know, you don't know rules of thumb, and you don't know how things are done in the real world. In terms of other than finding a mentor, in terms of resources, I mean, this is not in any way an endorsement or any position by the organizations. It's just something I'm aware of, that there is some message boards and things. Engineering Tips, I think, is one of them I used to refer to a lot. And it's basically, it's an old technology for somebody younger, but it's a message board where people can post questions and, you know, discussions on those questions. And a lot of the things you come across your first couple of years that you don't understand, going to something like that will be very helpful, because you don't just get a single answer. You're going to get a discussion and 15 different engineers from all over the countries of all different ages and experiences to chime in on it. They may be right, they may be wrong. I don't know. I'm not endorsing you use their answers. I'm just saying that's the only thing I'm aware of that I think would be a really good tool and resource to brush up on those skills.
And if I might just add on that,
please, yeah.
we talked early on about the reforming of engineering education and some of those constraints that make that incredibly difficult. And so at NCSEA, we recognize some of those difficulties, and we have spent time trying to solve them. But instead, we've, in the last year, pivoted towards creating what we call the New Grad Initiative. And we are creating relatively sophisticated training modules on a wide variety of topics, but first ones being masonry and wood, to assist firms and to assist young grads with how to make that transition from what you learned in college to what you really need to know in your job. So keep an eye out. New Grad Initiative is coming very soon, and the first module is very far underway. And so hopefully that will be one of those resources that will be available to help our new grads transition in.
And some of the ASE continuing education programs are useful because a lot of them are not very technical and they're not very college orientated. I took a couple of the classes that Alex Newman offered, and they were a lot of discussion and a lot of debate, and you realize that even the guys that you think are senior to you and know everything, they really don't. I mean, these guys that are tops in their field sometimes, I've bounced questions off Glenn at times that he, didn't really have a firm answer for, and realized, this was a gray area that, required some judgment. So, it's experience and listening to other people and just learning, but don't think that every single answer is going to come from a calculation and get you 4.7 and that's the answer. We have to use judgment all the time and not have perfect knowledge of what we're calculating. So
thank you for that. Great. Guys, we still have questions in the queue here, but we're reaching the top of our hour. But I'll just, before I offer some closing thoughts, each of you, would you like to spend maybe 30 seconds, a minute, with any wrap-up thoughts that you want to offer based on what we talked about before we depart? Emily, would you like to take a shot? Go first.
Sure, I'd love to go first. I guess I would just like to say at NCSEA, we're very committed to some of our very traditional strengths, supporting our SEAs, strong continuing education for practicing engineers, but we are trying to pivot and provide new offerings very much based on this joint vision. The New Grad Initiative is one of them. Engaging with a PR and strategic outreach specialist is another one. We really focus on branding and messaging to advocate for our practicing engineers. I hope that you're hearing that not just NCSEA, but all three organizations are strategically planning for both today's and tomorrow's challenges. We hope these examples reinforce to you that we're both listening and responding on behalf of the profession, not any one organization. I would encourage you to please consider where your passion aligns with both current and future initiatives and actively participate in the advancement of our structural engineering profession.
Thank you, Emily. Stacy, how about you?
But I'd like to start off by saying that I think everybody needs to remember that we have a very robust and a great structural engineering profession. And there may be some downside, but let's also look at the positive side to be supported by 3 national organizations in that profession. We're all lucky to be a part of this profession. Each organization has developed its own niche and is now must come together for the benefit of the full profession. There's lots of opportunities for everyone to be involved, no matter the level of experience that you have. I am very encouraged by what I see in the level of collaboration that's happening, as well as the reduction and duplication of efforts between the 3 organizations. Similar to Emily, this can't just be done by the 3 of us talking, and by no means is it. You really all need to find what's the best place that fits your desires. Think about each of the organizations and find a place to get involved. There's opportunities to get involved in any one of our organizations and to help advance the profession.
Thank you, Stacy. Joe?
Sure. I think this event today is a great sign of the progress we've been making in collaborating, and hopefully it's something that there'll be more of in some form. We've been making a lot of progress on a lot of the issues in the vision statement, and more importantly, we're collaborating and cooperating on a regular basis. I think the profession is more unified than it has been in a long time, maybe ever. And we have a new generation of solid leadership and a solid vision, and we're all collaborating on it and working towards it. I think today was, again, a fantastic example to show the profession that this is the way to move the profession forward. Keep doing this, and I'm confident we can continue to make progress working together in the manner that we have. And I think it's important that we pass the torch. You know, everyone on this call here passes the torch of collaboration and cooperation onto the next group of leaders, and they keep it going.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. Well, everyone, I wish we could go on, but I'm afraid that's about all we have time for today. You know, like many professions, structural engineering faces a future full of opportunity, but also challenges and uncertainty. And we have to embrace that change. It's the only way, it's the only path forward to a vibrant and relevant future. I want to echo what our three panelists said about the encouragement that we see in these organizations working together, but also the point that it's just not up to us. It's up to all of you to join in, find your place, and help us work together towards this future. So Emily, Stacy, Joe, thank you for sharing your time and wisdom. It was great. More importantly, thank you for your leadership on behalf of the structural engineering profession. You're an inspiration for all of us. I also want to thank the staff at NCSEA and CASE and SEI for organizing this today. Great job. Well done. So that wraps up our town hall for today. I hope you found it informative. Thank you, all of you out there, for participating, for your very thought-provoking questions, and for your feedback in the polls, which we're going to carry forward with as well.
On behalf of CASE, NCSEA, and SEI, I would like to thank you for your participation in today's event. You will now be redirected to a post-event survey. This concludes today's program. Thank you and have a great day.